Qulture is brought to you in part thanks to the Miriam Aaron Rowland Canadian Content Fund, helping Vermont PBS increase its commitment to Canadian and cross-border programming.
There's so much happening in Montreal.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Confabulation. The community has these stories they want to share.
Nowadays, I just only like feeling the Bernie Sanders burn. That's a shout out to PBS.
Comics is a really great mode for self-expression.
We're celebrating the Drawn and Quarterly edition of Craig's Modern Classic Blankets.
Drawn and Quarterly is considered one of the great comics publishers in the world.
I have a problem with David Heti.
This is David Heti, and you are listening to I Have a Problem with David Heti.
Podcasting works so well for storytelling. This is a city full of weird and wonderful people.
In the moment, you just never blush. Yeah.
And everyone has stories to share.
Qulture.
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 Culture.
A couple of things. One, thank you guys for doing this. This is really awesome of you.
Confabulation is a monthly storytelling series modeled after The Moth. Storytellers tell a true-to-life experience of theirs.
Yeah, we're going to start off with Gerard, who's not here yet. Then Carol, you're next.
It's kind of a weirdly intimate thing. It's very naked, very vulnerable.
It's a great audience. They're really welcoming. They're very warm and generous.
Which is very weird for a comic, I think. Normally it's a little antagonistic. They're like sitting there, arms crossed, make me laugh. And so it's a bizarre opportunity to speak before a group of people without having to make them laugh. So that to me is unnatural. I kind of feel like, why are people giving the performer love? Like, why do they want them to succeed? It's so different than what I know.
No, I know there's conventions be like, oh, it's good to be here. But the fact of the matter is that I am here, you are here. Why ask how we feel about it? Let's just move on. You know, I know that you come to a comedy show expecting to laugh and enjoy yourselves, but life isn't fair.
Audience on all sides.
I've attended Confabulation more times than I've performed. The audiences, I think, are so supportive. It doesn't sit well with me. I feel resentment, perhaps.
So the funny thing about, okay, well that's a weird thing to say. The funny thing about David Heti is a funny guy. The idea that he would say the audience is, for example, too giving or too loving is pretty classic for him. I think that there's a real appetite for what we're doing here. It is a little bit different than pure comedy. It is a little bit different than a one-person show. You walk up on stage and there are 130 people watching you who just want to see you rock. Even if a story doesn't work, you feel the audience is on your side. And that's such a rare thing.
This isn't supposed to be happening to me. And I haven't got a doctor, so I can't go get any advice.
It is something very intimate. It is something really enjoyable where you, the audience member, gets to connect with someone who's opening up about some important life event that they want to share.
Because I'm thinking, you're getting old. Old. And then the little kid in me jumps up and says, what's next? What's next? I want to know what's next. Yes, let's go.
We get such a wonderful collage of people. You get stand-ups, of course.
She is a stand-up comedian.
Storytellers who are writers. She is also now a published author. But also, anyone and everyone can take part in this show.
Our parents had been divorced for a long time. She'd been living alone on the swamp where we grew up. Dating is difficult for anybody. It's more difficult when you're a 50-year-old woman on a swamp in rural Ontario. So she did start this Lava Life account.
I started Confabulation 6 years ago. I had become a big fan of true storytelling events, specifically The Moth. Confabulation is the only monthly true life storytelling event in Montreal. We have 6 storytellers a night, and stories typically are 8 to 10 minutes, without notes, without props, without gimmicks.
She received a message from her gentleman suitor saying, I have to tell you something. I mean, legally I have to tell you something. I murdered somebody. What? Who? Oh, my wife. You still up for that coffee, or?
What makes this different, though, I don't like the competitive element at Moth events.
And so finally, it was time to meet the man.
And we really work hard to make sure it's a showcase of stories, not a competitive evening.
And he says, you know, we should save these leftovers for Ron. Yeah, later, Ron.
Why do I come? Because we're naturally prone to want to engage and listen to other people's stories. I just like the fact that it's just stripped down, back to basics, entertainment, which is just the good old art of storytelling. Well, I think it's the main destination spot if you want to see any kind of storytelling, and you see all types of people.
I don't know if you guys know a lot about triathlon. It's basically a sport that was invented as an excuse for people with exercise addiction. This is what it is.
I love the storytellers who come onto the show. This is a city full of weird and wonderful people. We are, of course, going to have people who love telling stories.
And people are swimming past each other. Some people are swimming over top of each other. It's really dangerous. I got a toe in my mouth. Like a complete stranger's toe in my mouth. Like a guy who spends 67% of his time with his feet in sweaty sneakers. You know what I mean? Like an athlete's foot in my mouth. That's what happens.
We workshop with all of our storytellers in advance, work them through the narrative steps. What makes a good story? We've been trying to help the person not to change their voice, but to really bring their voice out of the piece.
I was concerned about how we were going to get from your stand-up, which I'm used to seeing, which is very different from storytelling.
So David Heti is someone I've wanted on the show for some time. He has a podcast with No More Radio, a podcast network in Montreal. It's a collection of local podcasts with the goal of telling stories in an interesting, innovative way. Podcasting works so well for storytelling because once you get away from the broadcast clock, shows are as long as they need to be and become a much more personal encounter.
Hi, hello, and welcome to I Have a Problem with David Heti. I am David Heti.
And this is a podcast where someone comes on with a grievance to air with me. Either I did something in the past to upset them, or they take issue with a certain general character trait. Sounds very combative, but it is a little bit, and I will try to defend myself. My guest today is Lucy Letterhandler. Out of this antagonism, perhaps we've come to some sort of resolution. It's a way of understanding certain feelings you can't bring to light so much through stand-up. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Okay.
It's my house. I do have a problem getting you, and specifically what I don't understand is why you're not more embarrassed more of the time. The first time that we really got to know each other, I was literally putting makeup on your face and you were sitting there in striped pants that were so small you couldn't even do them up. And you were just thinking about what you were going to say on stage as opposed to the fact that this relative stranger was putting lipstick on you.
It's less of a performance. It's more rooted, like you can have these different ways of understanding a single event.
Like what?
Like when I'm staying at your home. Like for instance.
But that's timid. That's not embarrassed.
But it's not embarrassed. I guess not embarrassed.
I mean, you still walk around in your underwear, like.
Yeah, but just as a very friendly. Come on, you guys do that. And I think the sorting out of these problems, it's also intrinsically comedic because there's this sense of this fundamental disorder.
In the moment, you just never blush. Yeah.
I want to have some sort of podcast. I think it's a nice thing to complement the stand-up. You're building on others' sort of notoriety.
I haven't seen you bomb very much, except at the Seagull Center.
Okay, yeah.
Can a joke be a story?
Oh, yeah, I mean, what is a story? It seems to be some sort of, I guess, a series of events which are understood to be tied together somehow. It takes you along a route where initially you have one idea and then it's revealed to be something other than what you initially thought.
So for me, you are the necessary evil, which allows me to do what I want, which is to tell jokes. But the terrible thing is that I can't even tell the jokes that I want to tell because you don't understand comedy the way that I know it. No, but really, thank you for being here.
Do you think comedians naturally make good storytellers?
I think for sure. I think definitely. Comics know. Story has to have a punch to please a listener.
A more senior comic has told me that you have to love your audience. But I think there has to be a way around that.
I mean, you're asking for people to pay attention to you. You have to make it worth their time. It's that simple. If a comic is totally ignorant to that, I mean, they're going to have no audience in the first 30 seconds. I was a student of philosophy, then I was a lawyer. It's a lot of questioning, a lot of uncertainty. It's like a 3D chessboard or something. Comedy is on a different plane, but in the same direction. It's all dealing with ideas and questions of ethics and norms. I think what's compelling about stand-up, I think you get to deeper truths, and I think it allows you these very crystalline moments of articulation.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Drawn and Quarterly is hosting Cliff Nesteroff on one of the stops of his book launch for his book, The Comedians, the history of 20th century comedians.
I've been a fan of Cliff's for as long as I've known him. When I met him, he was known as Shecky Gray, Vancouver's infamous cymbal-smashing insult comic.
Drawn and Quarterly, they focus on graphic novels, but they're constantly having events, they're constantly bringing in authors.
A tremendous book, necessary for any comedy fan. Also with us tonight is comedian David Heti. We're also very happy to have him here tonight.
Yes, David, Cliff, thanks for coming, everybody. Let's remove the stand-up mics. I was at the Comedy Central party and I was carrying around a copy of my book like an idiot, you know, hoping people would recognize the jacket flap or something. And Todd Barry, who was there, and I said, Todd, I wanted to give you a copy of my book. Todd Barry is a stand-up comic, very funny. And I said, I want to give you a copy of my book, and he goes, oh, am I in it? And I went, no. And he was like, oh. And then there was no more conversation. A lot of the people that are fans of this book so far are my heroes. So Mel Brooks gave me a blurb for the back of the book. Albert Brooks invited me to his house. Steve Martin sent me the nicest email ever, and then sent me like a flurry of emails asking questions about old comedians. I was like, Steve, please, enough.
Drawn and Quarterly was pretty successful right from the beginning.
I wondered, like you said, it's a comedy boom right now.
Yes.
And everybody was like, that's the publisher to watch out for. We were initially looking for a space for the office, and then we just ended up creating a store and filling it with stuff that we were interested in besides comics. Right away, like, we built a stage in the bookstore because we wanted to have regular readings.
So eventually this comedy boom will bust, and then you and I will be doing much smaller bookstores than this.
We've been sleeping the past couple weeks. So.
It's been established enough now that it is just one of those places you go.
Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Chris Oliveros was the founder of Drawn and Quarterly 25 years ago. He wanted to create a comics magazine that would be on the newsstands and would bring the kind of comics he thought were interesting to a wider audience. Comics at that time, maybe not so differently than it is now, is dominated by superheroes, but there was an underground alternative comics movement as well. And graphic novels had not been established. Mouse had come out, so there was sort of the great literary graphic novel. It was something that a lot of us were waiting for. But at the time, there was not, much out there. There was Raw magazine, which was Art Spiegelman and Francois Mouly's magazine that Mouse was serialized in. There was Fantagraphics, and they were the sort of the big alternative comics publisher. But there was room for others, and so Drawn and Quarterly did establish itself, kind of very quickly. Canada has a very strong cartooning community. Chris saw the comics of Julie Doucet, and she's a Montreal cartoonist. It just kind of, snowballed. He just then signed Seth, cartoonist from Toronto, and had been kind of going after Chester Brown for a while. So he finally brought Chester into the fold. And when Mouse came out, there were a number of cartoonists like Seth and Chester who said to themselves, this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to make books like that. This is my chance. So for like the alternative comics crowd, it's where we were headed. It's what we wanted.
We're celebrating the Drawn and Quarterly edition of Craig's modern classic graphic novel, Blankets. And
Thank you.
We're very honored. And
So
really,
am I. Thank you for being here. And
So by the time Craig starts working on Blankets, it was just a given that you could just make, a long personal work.
Blankets, it's a coming-of-age story about growing up in rural Wisconsin. I was resisting what I was seeing in mainstream comics, which was these explosive power fantasies with superheroes and sci-fi, whatever. And I wanted instead to have this big, huge book where barely anything happens. It's just small scale, human, quiet, intimate. The sort of stage could be as big as just a bed for several pages. Comics coming in the newspaper, the Sunday Funnies, was like our first visual medium. We didn't have a TV until I was like 6. I realized comics is a great mode for self-expression. It just takes a pencil and a paper and one person can create their visions. So I was taking, my real life stories and sort of converting them to this cartoony form. I think everybody's childhood is traumatic, and in telling your own story, you give other people the permission to feel and express their stories. I really wanted to create comics that had sort of the emotional resonance of a good song. Why aren't comics like music in terms of how you're moved emotionally while reading them? So that was something I was aiming for. I thought that should be a purpose of comics. Blankets is published first in 2003. It was very surprising. It was an instantaneous hit. It just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I think it was part of a sea change that was happening in comics. It was unique. There wasn't people putting out 600-page books that were not serialized in some form. After that was when big publishers started, seeking out cartoonists to make long-form comic books.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Merci.
I read it in one night.
Really?
I was non-stop. Wow, it was maybe the greatest comic book night ever. Yeah, I really like it.
As there were more comics telling personal stories.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
You're the best.
And less just being superhero oriented. More women found things that they were interested in comics, and just found, more women making comics, and that just kind of grew. We were always interested in what stories women were telling.
Drawing, it's a way to express something that sometimes you don't have words for. What I like in graphic novel is that compared to comics, it's more free. We can do whatever into the page, whatever we want.
Julie, elle a un autre livre aussi qui s'appelle Everywhere Antennas. Je suis Daphné, je travaille à la librairie Drawn and Quarterly. J'ai choisi ce journal. Julie travaille ici à la librairie. And she also considers herself as an author, which is really important, and in this book you can see the author voice emerge.
We're Drawn and Quarterly, we have this bookstore that's becoming a destination bookstore. We should be leading on talking about and promoting graphic novels. So we created the Graphic Novel Book Club, with that in mind, to seriously talk about comics the way people had been talking about novels for hundreds of years.
Do you want to say something quickly about how you found the book, or?
I feel like Drawn and Quarterly would not give up easily on an author. When they start to publish someone, normally they keep on publishing this person.
The most important thing for us has always been, to publish the comics that the cartoonists wanted to make.
They support the art of the person. I always had the last choice on the art, on the cover.
There is very little and oftentimes no editorial interference with what people give us.
They are at your service, can you say that in English? They are here to help you giving birth to of your book.
If it sells well and everybody can make a living out of it, that's great. But the foremost thing to us is getting people to make the art that they want to make.
The story goes that Craig was looking for a new publisher for Blankets, and he had started shopping it around, and he thought sort of at the last minute, oh, I guess I should try Drawn.
That's not the story, no. Drawn and Quarterly is the greatest comics publisher in North America, so I'm super honored to be published by them now. And I don't think I would have dreamed that this would have happened earlier. Thank you big time to D&Q for doing the new edition of Blankets, because I definitely feel connected on a personal level with the people at Drawn and Quarterly. And I've never had that before in my career. It's like I finally found my tribe in comics.
We're an artist-first company. I know that's a big part of our success. We don't lose sight of that's why we're doing it. We're considered one of the great comics publishers in the world right now. That it's, you know, such a beloved comics publisher is, you know, it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage for the first time, Emily Wilson.
So I look at the Collège des Médecins complaint form, and it says, you know, put your doctor's first and last name. And I don't know his first name, obviously, so I Google him. And the first thing that comes up is ratemymd.com. And this guy has 2 stars out of 5, which I wouldn't trust for like a food truck or
Telling stories that aren't comedic, you know, just like speaking before an audience, I find that much more difficult because it's harder for me to read an audience as to whether they're with me or not. Personally, I find it easier to work in an area where there's more of a right and a wrong, which is a live feedback that you get from a comedy audience.
It's about 4 in the morning, and I just open my eyes because it feels like I'm kicked in the stomach. Is this how I die? Because that is so disappointing.
What am I hoping will happen? I'm hoping not to embarrass myself. It's a nice way to stretch your own skills, but like with slight resentment though for the whole scene a little bit. Because I don't, like again, the audience is so receptive. They're so like good-willing. I find it makes me uncomfortable.
I never thought I'd be so happy to find out I caused someone to lose their job. Now I will know that I actually can trust the feeling in my gut.
Our next storyteller is a stand-up comedian. You could get his first and debut album on iTunes, It Was Okay, by David Heti.
Hey, hello. Hello. Yeah, all right. So I normally do stand-up, and so speaking to audiences, you know, with sincerity is not something, you know, I do. So, but I suppose we can begin with the fact that I went to law school. I was a law student at a faculty of law not so far from here, several streets away. Very, you know, well, you know, nice reputation, and like, you know, around the globe. What comes about is the law school skit night. It's like this cabaret evening. So I wrote this sketch, and it wasn't so well received, you know? The sketch was titled Everything for Everyone Everywhere Now. Little satirical takedown of the faculty with its reputation as like this, you know, this paragon of like international law, human rights, ethics, all that stuff. Sketch did not go over very well at all. In fact, they released a video, like a DVD, the whole evening, and you know, to everyone's you know, surprise, the only sketch missing was mine, and I emailed the person doing the taping. I was like, "Can you tell me the truth?" And he's like, "Look, to be honest, I just wanted this to die down. I want to get on with like my life and my studies, and you're just lying for your own personal gain, and what makes life simpler for yourself." Anyway. I'll finish this up by saying that about a year and a half later, when working for the Department of Justice, Canada, so I was a lawyer for the federal government, you know, working for all the federal department, you know, sort of departments. I lost my job for being in violation of their code of ethics and values for the public service, for the you know, sort of for my stand-up comedy. Which I disagreed with. Yeah, that's the story. That's the story. Thanks very much.
is our show for this evening, guys. Thank you so much for
How do you think it went?
I think it went fine. I think it went fine. Yeah. I thought they were, they're with me and they laughed, enough, and they were following. So, yeah, I think it went okay. Yeah.
Qulture is brought to you in part thanks to the Miriam Aaron Rowland Canadian Content Fund, helping Vermont PBS increase its commitment to Canadian and cross-border programming.